So, hi everyone, thanks for coming and thanks for the organizers for inviting me. Since I couldn't settle whether to call this talk necro-cryptomancy or crypto-necromancy, I settled with an attempt to revive non-commutative cryptography, and I brought some blockchain applications for this area. Quick question, how many of you have encountered non-commutative cryptography? Oh, quite some, okay. I brought some interesting topics for you too. So we are going to have a quick recap what this area of research is, why it is especially interesting in blockchain applications, and as I promised, we will have some cool examples of that. So non-commutative cryptography were started by Wagner and Magyarik in '85. They made a pretty simple public key infrastructure, public key crypto system based on non-Abelian groups. Of course, this system found out to be unsecure, but it was really interesting, a new perspective for cryptography, and it started a new area of research. So the basics of non-commutative, non-Abelian cryptography, it's the area formally is called Combinatorial group theory. It has nothing to do with combinatorics. I like to express it how groups work together. The representation that you see above is called the Artin representation. It's a universal representation of every group ever. You list the generators for your group and you define the relationship between your generators. It can be infinite or finite, various kinds. And the representation from these groups is the union of the generators and the inverses. And the group action is that you just put them next to each other, just string concatenation. This is going to be really important later for, in the blockchain use cases part. The group action is just string concatenation. There are some fundamental problems in this area. For example, the word problem. This should be familiar for everyone with a computer science background. The conjugacy problems, this shouldn't be that familiar. It's a much harder and much interesting problem, not just in cryptography. It's widely used in physics and chemistry too. It has search versions, decisional problems, blind decisional problems, various kinds. What you see here is the blind search problem and the decomposition problems that recently started to become popular. So once we have the representation theory, okay, we have defined that how we write down our groups, that's ideal for this kind of cryptography, we have to actually find for one. So we have requirements for these kinds of groups too. Of course, it has to be well studied, as usual in cryptography. The word problem that you saw should be solvable in linear time, deterministically. And the trapdoor problem that you are using for hiding data should not have a polynomial probabilistic time solution as usual. And of course, it should show exponential growth with the basis. The basis here is the generators in the Artin representations left side. So one of the mainstream, the most common platform group for non-commutative cryptography were the Braid Groups. This is how a Braid group look like. It has an algebraic and a geometrical representation. You can see that geometrically these are curves with an additional z dimension that gives depth. And two braids differ from each other if you change the depth between a crossing. Anything else, how you pull the strings, if you don't change the crossing orders, you are basically looking at the same braid. This is going to be important. Representing braids on computers have ridiculously small computational and memory overhead. This is why initially this was an interesting part of cryptography research. Sadly, the conjugacy search problem has a deterministic solution, but happily it's still very, very inefficient. So this was the golden age of Braid group cryptography and how they died. Bigelow and Kramer proved that actually Braid groups, even if they don't seem, they are linear. They are a subgroup of the general linear group, and that's a really big slap in every form of cryptography. Who remembers the algebraic eraser? it almost became the ISO standard for RFID card public key cryptography. It was like a huge deal, super efficient, low energy, assumingly secure, but it turns out that it were not there. Since Kramer came up with Lawrence-Kramer normal form, they found an algebraic span attack and the ISO standard was revoked. And in various areas from physics, there was advances in new algorithms for solving the decomposition and the conjugacy problems. So non-commutative crypto were like officially died in the early 20s. So where are we now? Up to best of my knowledge, this took like 1 year to collect these data. And if you think or saw any other advance with this, please note me. But up until today, where we are with non-commutative attacks and cryptography and properties, every solution for the conjugacy search and decision problems still need to generate all the supersummit sets. These are minimal commutators for a selected element. You can see the complexity of searching with the best known algorithm called the cycle-decycle attack. Here is the complexity of that, and it may look, of course, it looks polynomial, but there is a catch here. We don't know a bound for k. There is a conjecture that it may be polynomial, but now it looks like it's exponential. So take a note that k is unknown in the equation mostly. In terms of n and l, where l is the length of the braid. So all other conjunctions, there are several papers of breaking braid group cryptography, but those are addressed for special braid group cryptographies where they are using special braids like the necklaces, the Ouroboros, or sliding slats. It's not a general solution for all kinds of non-commutative abelian groups. So there has been some positive advances also. So it turns out that you don't always need the one and only conjugacy search problem, because basically any non-abelian group that has only one-sided distributivity is a very good candidate to research for non-commutative crypto, like the general linear group, matrices. We have plenty of cryptanalysis tools from this area. So how many of you formally expressed security in complexity theory terms with generic case complexity? It's kind of a new kind of complexity expressed for reasoning about complexity, because in cryptography we have average and worst case, and they are like half of the truth from different sides. It's just not enough to reason really well about cryptography. Well, generic case is one, and it was invented from guys who worked with non-commutative cryptography, called basically accurately Spherline and others. So another advance that I personally like, some of you know that I'm really into post-quantum and fully homomorphic encryption system, is that most conjugacy search problems and decomposition problems fall into quantum hard complexity classes by default. So this is my personal idea. It has some mathematical reasoning, but this is where you can attack this whole talk. In my opinion, the linearity, the advance by Bigelow and Kramer, the linearity of braid groups is a scalability problem. It just means that in the later examples, the commitments and the public keys will be quite large, but it will be efficient to compute on, and the security is not that much broken. We have other groups to work on, so all the cryptanalytic or breaking algorithms that I spoke now is specifically made for braid groups, and I've said that we have several platform groups like Thomson groups, Lover tables, matrix decompositions that are not addressed by these attacks, also the shifted conjugacy. So here is the key for this talk, why I choose to be the topic on this conference, is that because only non-commutative cryptography has the ability that if you change the underlying platform group, it's invariant of the communication history. So if you take a thought experiment and express elliptic curves as in Artin representation, you have the parameters of the elliptic curves, you have y, and the relationship between your parameters is the equation of the elliptic curve. But you can't just concatenate together your secret key and the generator. The group action is different. You have to multiply this according to elliptic curve mathematics. But in non-commutative cryptography, you can just put your secret key next to, according to the relationship next to each generator, and if you change the underlying group, the logic is not gonna change. So if we found a better way, a more scalable way for braid groups on an ideal world where Ethereum uses braid group cryptography, we can scale without losing any transactions, private keys, zero knowledge proof, witnesses, whatsoever. So here is example number 1, a ZK snark with braid group cryptography. You have user secret key and private key as usual on the common reference string. The public key is the conjugate of your secret key, of course. You have bases and or not to express logic, and if you have an n-bit algorithm, you have n+3 braided, stranded braid. This is gonna use braid groups for a platform group, but note again that this can be any kind of other platform group. So you have to take care of eliminating most free subgroups. We haven't spoken about free subgroups. Basically, you have to avoid them in this kind of cryptography because they have really efficient solutions for breaking your system. You still have to leave some free subgroups in your system, and it's better if they are infinite, but you have to take care of most of them, otherwise users can't generate secure keys. In the case of braids, because only positive braids are free, you have to somehow express whether to use a positive or a negative exponent. So I just used a binary key for this, where 0 defines a negative and 1 positive exponent for the generator. And now you express your data with another braid and conjugate the commitment of your binary circuit. We note here that I called this ZK snark with trivial gadgets because even though there are more efficient and more secure zero-knowledge proofs out there, you can't really work with them because the effort you have to take from your algorithm to reach a Boolean circuit or vectors to wrap or use Pinocchio or bulletproofs is enormous. Like it's too much work, and there are some really nice efforts on that, like Socrates and stuff. But using non-commutative cryptography, you just have to relabel your Boolean circuit. It's a one-to-one transition from your algorithm to a representation where you can use a form of cryptography. Here is some pseudocode for that. This one already uses the Fiat-Shamir transform to make it non-interactive. I basically just hash your commitment, and if I get a 1, I prove that my commitment binds to my input, and if it's a 0, I have to prove that the commitment binds to me. You can optionally, of course, emit this it binds to me part if you are not using authenticated snarks. Like you don't have to verify that X or Alice is the person who made the proof, it's just valid. And here you see a binary adder and a subtractor generator based on Braid. It supports arbitrary length binary addition and subtraction, and you saw that it's 5 lines. It's quite trivial, and it's part of my research to make a complete S-Express and gadget lib based on braid groups, braid theory for EWASM. We have a second example. The guys behind Mixeth will be giving a talk today, so I'm not gonna ruin the fun, but verifiable shuffles, another quite trivial thing you can achieve with non-commutative cryptography. If you remember the image, if you just remove the z-axis from the geometrical representation, these braids induce a permutation. So it's just a permutation, and this z-axis can serve as a key. if you remove it from the brain. And iterated asking whether you know the original conjugate of it proves that you know the initial braid behind the permutation. You achieve the verifiable shuffle. And my favorite example, how many of you are familiar with identity-based encryption? Okay, the same, the same guys. So I consider identity-based encryption a mass crypto adoption gold mine. It's the best thing we can ever dream of, except that it up until now relied on a trusted third party. But last year there was an advance called registration-based cryptography, where you don't have another trusted third party generate your keys for you. There is a curator that just holds your key. It's kind of similar to EIP 721, where you have a proxy contract for holding the keys. The trick here is it's not just a mapping like on a storage level. It's mathematically, cryptographically, your public key is made to look like your driver license plate, passport number, whatsoever. You can ask how your public key to look like, and it can look like anything. So how do I say, governments can easily transform from a centralized, untrusted infrastructure to blockchains in an ideal world. Of course, it's really unlikely to happen in the future. So registration-based encryption relies on indistinguishability obfuscation and somewhat statistically binding hashes. And you can achieve indistinguishability obfuscation with Braid Groups, because different conjugates for an algorithm will reach different obfuscation for it. Just a quick recap on I/O. Currently, software companies defend against reverse engineers with program obfuscation, but every way they do it now is just obscurity. You measure the security of those systems with Russian teenagers and energy drinks. Within indistinguishability obfuscation, it's truly cryptographically secure, and you measure the security of it in bits. So it's the one and only true form of program of obfuscation you can achieve, and it can be used to construct fully homomorphic encryption, ZK snark whatsoever. So back on track, different conjugates for a Boolean circuit expressed as a braid will yield two different obfuscation, and you basically retrieve the definitional problems that it relies on. So what's the actual security for a Boolean circuit expressed on braids? So you saw that the theoretical best algorithm for solving the conjugacy problem, the cycle-decycle algorithm, has this particular complexity class. I've evaluated it for a SHA hash with 100 byte input, and it reached, oh, we can see the exponent. Okay, it reached 129 bit of security with this complexity class. So it's still, this is again my personal stuff. Braid Groups still has a bad reputation, but in my opinion, it's not so bad. So 129-bit security is quite good, I think. So my closing thought, even though non-commutative crypto has a bad reputation, and it deserves it. It had some really big slaps and advancement in analytical breaks and stuff, but that's only one part of use cases for non-commutative crypto. I don't see any reason leaving elliptic curve research dead because the NIST curve has a backdoor. We know that it has a backdoor, and we didn't abandon elliptic curve crypto. So it turns out that Braid Groups are not that much of an ideal platform group for non-abelian cryptography, and we completely abandoned this area. The immutability primitives, like they are invariant of communication history, is a goldmine for blockchain use cases. This prevents hard forks on cryptographic primitive updates. We can trivially construct from Boolean circuits, we can trivially construct cryptography-ready representations. So you can use any form of protocol based on it, and it's not by default, because AVPP is somewhat quantum secure, but it's really close to being somewhat secure by default. So if I have any time left, I'm ready for questions personally or any of the contacts about me. Thank you very much for the attention.
Yeah, so should I just shout?
Allume-le.
Yeah, so this is not right. We're doing this for the camera, right? Hi. Thank you for a fascinating talk. I wanted to ask, experience teaches us that once there's one polynomial solution for a problem, there's going to be better and better polynomial solutions, especially if some entity has an incentive for this. We see this over and over again. The reason we use zero-knowledge proofs is because they were super inefficient, and then we all decided that they're super great for industry, and then they got improved and improved and improved. Why wouldn't this happen for non-commutative cryptography? So why would you feel kind of safe in deploying it, even if it's upgradable, as you say, safe in deploying it, knowing that maybe as long as there's a big enough bounty, the algorithms will get better and better?
There is a big enough bounty, so I've said that the conjugacy search problem is not just appears in cryptography, it's variously used in fluid dynamics and physics and chemistry. So, but this is one of the advantages also. So this is an area that not only cryptographers work on, and this is why I dared to say that Braid Group conjugacy search has as much research as prime factoring. Chronologically, this is not true because Braid Groups have been around since the 20s, but because various area of science works on the problem and still couldn't came up with a better solution. If this would completely Braid Group cryptography, it would in one way change the world because of the other advances it induces. And I said we can just change the platform group and the blockchain wouldn't care.
I have a follow-up, but I'll take it offline, I think.
Okay, then thank you again for the attention.